Bonjour tout le monde, j'ouvre maintenant la séance.
Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 2 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts of the House of Commons.
The standing orders. Members, I believe, are all in the room today in person, although, of course, members have the option to join us remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, with particular emphasis on our translators, interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code in the car, which links to a short awareness video. I'd like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Remember, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom, and catch the eye of either myself or the clerk, and the two of us will manage a speaking order if one is necessary. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement,
in accordance with Section 108.3G of the House Rules, 2025, the Auditor General's 2025 reports 1 through 4, and the 2025 Environment Commissioner's reports 1 through 4 were sent to the committee on June 10th, 2025.
Witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for agreeing to come in a little earlier today. We have Ms. Hogan here, the Auditor General of Canada. Nice to see you. Thank you again for being here. We have Mr. Jerry DeMarco, Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. Nice to see you again. As well as Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General. Nice to see you. Sami Hanoush, Principal. Nice to see you. And Nicholas Swales. Nice to see you as well. I understand that we will have 2 opening statements of 5 minutes each. I believe, Ms. Hogan, you will begin. You have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss our recent reports. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. You've introduced who is joining me today. We also have other members of our management team responsible for a few of the other audits that are present so that we can fully address any questions that the members may have. Before turning to our reports, I would like to take a moment to briefly outline the role of my office for the benefit of members newly appointed to this committee, while also acknowledging those of you who are returning and already familiar with our mandate. As Auditor General of Canada, my role is to provide Parliament with independent and objective information on how public funds and programs and services are managed on behalf of Canadians, supporting your efforts to hold government organizations to account. We do this through financial audits, performance audits, and special examinations of Crown corporations. Within my office, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development plays a key role in auditing the federal government's actions on environmental protection and sustainable development, and in monitoring progress towards Canada's climate and sustainability commitments. Together, we are happy to support Parliament and all of its committees in any way that we can. Your insights and feedback are vital to shaping our work, and we exist to serve Parliament and strive to continuously adapt to meet your needs. For example, our update on past audits, which was launched in 2021 to answer parliamentarians' questions about departments' progress in implementing our previous recommendations. We received feedback from the House of Commons and the Senate, and we will be introducing a new approach to following up on recommendations in the near future. So turning now to our recent reports, we will be making a joint opening statement beginning with the Commissioner.
Thank you. The reports I am presenting today all involve issues that are fundamental to achieving sustainability. I'll begin with our audit of Canada's National Adaptation Strategy, which aims to coordinate climate change adaptation action across Canada. We found weaknesses in the strategy's design and implementation. Key elements were missing, such as a prioritization of Canada's climate change risks. We also found that the Adaptation Action Plan, which is central to a national strategy, was not comprehensive. De plus, les 2 éléments fondamentaux de la stratégie.
Additionally, 2 major components of the strategy, namely the federal, provincial, and territorial bilateral action plans and the Indigenous Climate Leadership Agenda, were still being developed. While the 2023 release of the strategy was an important first step, it came nearly 20 years after we first recommended the development of a strategy to adapt to Canada's changing climate. Urgent action is still needed to deliver meaningful results for Canadians' health, safety, and livelihoods. Turning to our audit of Environment and Climate Change Canada, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and Parks Canada, we examined how they identify and monitor critical habitat for species at risk. The loss and degradation of habitat is the primary threat for most species at risk.
Use the best available information to identify critical habitats, they were often slow to gather the additional information needed to fully understand species needs. In addition, we found that monitoring on federal land was limited, making it difficult to assess whether actions were delivering intended results. Cet audit est le dernier d'une série qui...
This is the final audit in a series that focused on the implementation of the Species at Risk Act. Across all these audits, we observed delays and gaps in information that have hindered the protection and recovery of species at risk. To meet Canada's 2022 biodiversity commitments, departments must improve data collection and monitoring to prevent further species loss. Our next audit examined whether Fisheries and Oceans Canada effectively led the development of an integrated approach to managing marine resources in the Pacific, Arctic, and Atlantic Oceans. We found that while the department collaborated with partners in 5 priority regions, the resulting plans were high level and did not lead to concrete actions.
Planning, a newer, internationally recognized process adopted by the department in 2018 to coordinate when and where human activities should take place in the oceans, has also been limited. Nearly 30 years after integrated ocean planning became law, Canadians are still waiting for meaningful implementation. With worsening climate change and increasing pressures on marine resources, the department must step up its leadership. My final report looks back on over 30 years of federal sustainable development actions and outlines 6 lessons to help Canada improve its performance and build a better future. Implementing sustainable development is proving to be an immense challenge in Canada. Despite setting national and international targets, Canada has made the least improvement among all G7 nations in meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Ce rapport souligne la nécessité d'une approche.
This report calls for a more integrated approach to sustainable development that incorporates social, economic, and environmental factors in decision-making, policies, and programs. Other lessons include stronger national leadership and deeper collaboration, especially with Indigenous governments and peoples. This completes the summary of my 4 reports. The Auditor General will now review the key findings of her reports. Thank you, Jerry. I will first turn to our audit of registration under the Indian Act. Registration gives First Nations people access to vital services such as on-reserve housing, financial support for post-secondary education, and health benefits not covered by other programs. We found that Indigenous Services Canada poorly managed the registration process. The department averaged almost 16 months to make a decision on complex registration applications, exceeding its 6-month service standard. Even on applications prioritized for reasons such as medical emergencies, the department took on average about 10 months to deliver a decision.
Canada has the mandate to gradually transfer registration responsibilities to First Nations communities, working with community-based registration administrators and trusted sources organizations that help people apply for registration. However, we found that funding for trusted sources was unpredictable and unstable, and that the funding formula for community-based registration administrators had not changed since 1994. Registration under the Indian Act plays a central role in recognizing First Nations people under Canadian law. It gives access to important services and benefits, but people are waiting far too long for decisions. Our next audit examined National Defence's project to replace Canada's aging CF-18s with advanced CF-35 fighter jets. We found that the estimated costs of the Future Fighter Capability Project have significantly increased, and the project faces several risks that could jeopardize timely introduction of the new fleet. National Defence originally estimated that the project could cost $19 billion. The audit found that this figure was based on outdated information, and that by 2024, the projected costs had increased to $27.7 billion, almost 50% more than the original estimate. This figure does not include essential elements needed to achieve full operational capability, such as certain infrastructure upgrades and advanced weapons, which would add at least $5.5 billion to the total estimated cost. Le DI a également révélé qu'il avait d'autres risques importants.
The project also faces other important risks, including a potential shortage of qualified pilots and delays of over 3 years in the construction of 2 new fighter squadron facilities. There is the costs for building temporary facilities to accommodate these fighter jets will further increase infrastructure costs. Maintaining a strong fighter jet capability contributes to the safety and security of Canadians. This large, multi-year project requires active and ongoing management to control risks and costs to ensure the timely rollout of the new fleet. Our next audit looked at the federal government's efforts to right-size its office space to minimize costs and free up underused properties for potential conversion into affordable housing. In 2017, Public Services and Procurement Canada estimated that half of the government's office space was underused and planned a 50% reduction by 2034. We found that the department had made little progress in its efforts to reduce office space. The department estimates that this reduction will result in savings of about $3.9 billion over the next 10 years. However, between 2019 and 2024, it achieved less than a 2% reduction, mainly because of a lack of funding.
Or CMHC, supported by Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, is mandated to transform surplus federal office properties into affordable housing through the Federal Lands Initiative. The audit found that while CMHC was on track to meet the initiative's 2027-28 target to secure commitments to build 4,000 new housing units, the target is based only on commitments, and that about 49% of units will be ready for occupancy by 2027-28. Public Services and Procurement Canada and federal tenants need to accelerate their efforts to reduce the office space they occupy and contribute to increasing stock for housing that is sustainable, accessible, and affordable. Our final audit examined government contracts awarded to GC Strategies Incorporated, an Ottawa-based information technology staffing company. From April 2015 to March 2024, 31 federal organizations awarded 106 contracts to GC Strategies. We found that federal organizations frequently disregarded government procurement rules meant to ensure fairness, transparency, and value for Canadians. Par exemple, les organisations fédérales sont tenues.
For example, federal organizations are responsible for assessing the level of security required for a contract and for verifying that the people doing the work have the necessary security clearance. We found that in 21% of contracts examined, organizations lacked documentation to show that they had confirmed security clearances. The audit also found that federal organizations disregarded government requirements to monitor the work performed by contractors. They frequently did not have the evidence to show who performed the work, what work was done, or whether the people doing the work had the required experience and qualifications.
Those of previous audits that also showed deficiencies in how public servants applied federal procurement rules. This report does not include any recommendations because I don't believe that the federal government needs more procurement rules. Rather, organizations need to make sure that public servants understand and follow existing procurement rules. Mr. Chair, this concludes our opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Auditor General. We'll begin our first round, and just to refresh everyone's memory, the first round will consist of 3 members, 6 minutes each. And just to remind both returning and new members, I do time and watch the clock, but I've made it a practice of trying not to cut off witnesses as they're answering if they exceed the time. This is unique to this committee. I'll continue to do that unless I'm instructed to do otherwise. I find it gives our witnesses an opportunity to respond to questions in a serious manner. If it goes on too long, I will have to eventually curtail them. But I think witnesses have generally do understand that we are on a timeline here. The caveat, though, is you have to finish your question before your timeline. I will not let you go over your time to ask your question, so you do need to monitor your time, but I do want to always give our witnesses, both the auditor's office as well as department officials who come in, time to answer in a serious manner. So will we kick things off? Ms. Kusi, you're the first questioner of the 45th Parliament of Public Accounts. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. And
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
For not only returning to the Public Accounts Committee, but to the outstanding work that you and your team continue to do for Canadians as we continue to evaluate the expenditures of this Liberal government here heading into its 11th year. By now, all Canadians are aware of the scandal of GC Strategies, $64 million across 31 departments. For you yourself, this is even the second report, not the first, relative to this scandal and GC Strategies. In addition to the reports that you've completed, the Procurement Ombudsman has made appearances across committees indicating grave concern about procurement regulation and how this is followed, and this certainly circles back to the report here today. What GC Strategies did was egregious, and no organization, entity, corporation, big or small, should ever be able to do this to Canadians and the Canadian taxpayer. But it's evident once again from this most recent report that this government let them do it. Now, they weren't willing to support a motion in the House of Commons that banned GC Strategies for life, rather a paltry 7-year ban. And you yourself said, in your own words, the rules are clear. No more policies are needed. No recommendations are needed here. The government need only follow and enforce the rules. Why, based upon your intense evaluation, is this Liberal government incapable of following and enforcing the rules?
I think it's a question that we asked ourselves through many procurement audits that we've done over the last couple of years. What is driving the behavior that we are seeing in the public service? And I think I would point to two things. You know, what is it about the procurement process in the federal government that a staffing company is the mechanism that is typically used for IT services? Is it because the procurement process is complex, or that those delivering those services don't want to wade through all of that and are happy to just go through a staffing company? So I do think that that's something the government needs to figure out. There might be certain services where staffing companies make sense and others where it doesn't. The rest, I think, then rests with the public service. Why aren't the rules known and why aren't they being applied? And that is why I didn't see the necessity to issue new recommendations. I think going back to the basics and understanding the rules is essential, but I also think the government needs to figure out if there are too many and start taking doubled up rules or rules that aren't adding any value off, so that this can be a faster process in the future.
Yes, but fundamentally, it is the ministers who have oversight of the public service and must ensure that the rules are being followed and enforced. There was a new report issued today that federal managers are now required to sign an oath stating that they thought about it. They thought about the expenditures before they spent the money. Would you be able to expand upon this new regulation which has been put in place, that federal managers must think about the money that they are spending before signing for it?
I have to admit, I'm not sure I know the language of the oath that you're talking about. I do know, following our work on Arrivekin in the first contract we issued on professional services, that we're including contracts on McKinsey, that there was a requirement added that someone in the procurement process needed to attest that they knew all of the rules they needed to follow and that they had followed them. So that's a good reminder. But in my mind, it's just another step. And I really do think that it's time to sort of decide whether there are too many rules, because after my audits, internal audits, or third parties, the ombuds work, more rules are constantly added, and eventually it just becomes too much for people to be able to apply with, due diligence.
So what I'm hearing you say then is that signing an oath saying that public servants thought about the expenditures will not solve the problem, according to your evaluation.
Well, I think signing an oath is important. It's a good reminder of the responsibility that comes with the delegated authority. When an individual in a department or a Crown Corporation is given authority to spend taxpayer money, it's good to recognize the burden and the responsibility that comes with that. But I'm not sure that it will make sure that everyone understands all the rules. So I do think that there is a need to go back to some training and perhaps streamlining rules if necessary.
Indeed, and ministers do sign an oath when they take office that they will serve Canada and its citizens faithfully, and we have seen here that they have failed once again. So then, in your estimate, perhaps you can expand on your comments as to how we can hold both managers and ministers who oversee the public servants accountable to enforce the rules, because that's all you really want to see, are the rules followed and enforced. How can we ensure that ministers will do that?
So I wouldn't expect that a minister would be involved in day-to-day procurement practices in a department. There are rules that state when a procurement goes over a certain threshold that ministers need to be involved in the approval process. But the day-to-day, and most of the contracts that we looked at over the 2 audits on professional services were just about day-to-day contracting. So I do think a minister should ask, the deputy head how they are ensuring that rules are followed and good value for money is always achieved. But then it comes down to those within departments with that delegated authority to be aware of the rules, to apply them, and know why it's important to achieve value for money. And value for money doesn't always mean the lowest price. It means the best service or best product for the government at a competitive price.
Thank you for your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is one addition to my, I want to remind people in advance, when the witness is exceeded the time but wrapping up, members must also not interrupt. If members try to interrupt and ask a pointed question, I end it right there. So it's time for witnesses to give their answer, not for members to try to get one last question or clarification. There'll be time for that later, as there is right now. Ms. Yip, you have the floor. Welcome back for 6 minutes. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, and it's so good to see all of you back, Auditor General and the Environment Commissioner. What you do is very important, and certainly the scale and breadth of the topics that you study is important and something that we all should see value for. So thank you for that. I would like to turn to the report 4 on the professional services contract. So thank you for your work on this report. And so you mentioned, Ms. Hogan, that in your remarks just made that there may be too many rules. The government may have too many rules. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, during our audits, we kept trying to figure out why we were seeing the behavior that we were seeing. And when we spoke to public servants, some at times were unaware of some of the requirements that existed in the procurement rules. And I think that would be particularly true when we were looking at some of the lower dollar value contracts, so contracts under $40,000, many of which were contracts that were issued to GC Strategies. There is by default, the procurement rules are competitive first because that usually ensures a better price. But there is some exemptions, and one is if the contract value is under $40,000. The requirement, however, still exists for whoever's going to issue that contract to say, I need to make sure that this is the right market rate or that I'm not paying too much. And so you need to do something. Email to other vendors or a web search, something. And we found that that was often missed. That no one had confirmed whether the price was the market price, but it is a requirement. So, and that's why I say there are things that seem to be basic to ensure good value for money that are not necessarily always known, which brings me back to why I believe a good reminder of the rules and then an analysis of triaging whether there are just too many to make this more efficient.
Given that no new recommendations were made, would that suggest that prior guidance is still relevant and applicable today?
Well, I did issue recommendations in my first report on professional services contracts. There were recommendations issued in the ArriveCan report. The Procurement Ombuds has recommendations, and so I think those are very relevant still. But I don't see the value in telling the public service, follow the rules that you already have in place, because it creates the need to put an action plan in place to say what? Yes, we will. Well, I think it's about how do you make sure everyone knows what the rules are and how they should be followed. And so I think the rules are clear in my view. And now it's just making sure everyone who's involved in procurement processes know them and applies them.
Have the action plan in those other reports where you had recommendations, have they been implemented? Has there been progress?
Well, the report that we just issued in June actually took us back to the exact same time frame of the other report. So we were looking at contracts between 2015 and 2024. And I know following those first two reports that there were some changes made and some reminders and some training. So I can't tell you whether it's having an effect yet because I went back to look at the same period of time. So I wasn't surprised to see that we had the same findings because we were looking at the same period of time. So I think time will tell whether or not the reminders will have an effect. But the step to still look at whether there should be a reduction in the rules or a streamlining of the rules has yet to be done. And I really do encourage the public service to take that step.
Do you feel that some public servants may have a tough time following the rules?
I know the public servants that we meet simply want to do right by Canadians, and that's why one of the reasons I talk to departments about it, as there may be too many rules and it's slowing down the process, and in the need to serve Canadians better, that individuals are going around those rules. That could be a reason, and that's why I think the public service needs to figure out exactly why. I know that Andrew would like to add something if you would allow me, Mr. Chair, to pass the floor to him.
One thing that I think might help public servants is if simplification can be implemented. We found in, for example, our McKinsey report, and it would apply more broadly, that the understanding of the way that standing offers are used, and particularly whether they're competitive or not, is an area that Public Service Procurement Canada, central agencies, can make it easier for the public service to understand, and by virtue of that, follow the rules.
Do you feel that perhaps there might need to be more training in this area?
I always think training is a good reminder, and I don't think that training when it comes to procurement should be a one and done, right? I think that it should be repeated at a certain period of time because the rules do change, because maybe you haven't done procurement in a long time, and it's a good reminder. But that's just one step, right? That's not going to cure it all. You do have to have someone who monitors, and every procurement group within a department should have their own monitoring to see internally whether or not rules are being applied. And then when they're not, then that's when you highlight areas of perhaps repeat training or individuals who just need some coaching. So I think training is just the beginning of what is needed to make sure that procurement is properly done.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Ms. Shipp. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your work. It's quite interesting to cover the importance of public accounts and the role that we can play in the process. Thank you for this investment. Ms. Hogan, when I read the report, particularly on GC strategies, what struck me was the explosion of spending, $1.3 billion to $2.8 billion. So, in your opinion, is that a trend that we should be studying in depth? Do we invest enough resources to understand IT contracts that are awarded, and how do you evaluate the report? Because I'm sure that you cannot look at all of the contracts individually. Answer. Well, I'll start with the second question. When we do an audit of this type, we obviously have to just do a sampling, which is a well-recognized practice in auditing. We need to look at enough contracts to be able to identify trends, and that's how we did this. In IT contracts, it's the type of increase we see in all professional contracts across the federal government. I agree that sometimes a contract is necessary if there is a labor shortage or if there is an unexpected increase in workloads. So there are good reasons to have a contract, but I'd like to know that the government is considering that when contracts are established because of a lack of expertise, that it's ensuring that that expertise is transferred to the public service to avoid the need for always relying on contracts with third parties. One thing that struck me in your report is also the fact that there were no additional recommendations. That's something that I brought up in the House of Commons. The Liberal government said essentially that, well, that's good news, that there are no recommendations, as if it's a mark of confidence in your report. And we had some questions about that. And do you share that opinion? What was your intention when you didn't make a recommendation, and referring to 3 reports in which your recommendations were very critical? Answer. It's very rare that my office doesn't issue recommendations. So yes, I wanted it to be taken seriously, that parliamentarians, as you are doing here, ask why. I've taken this position that's out of the ordinary. So yes, if an audit is fantastic, there are no recommendations that are needed. But I didn't issue recommendations because I think that the rules are clear. And in my opinion, I don't need to say to the public service and the government to follow their own policies. So I encourage them to really evaluate the root causes of our observations, because these are worrying observations. The rules are there to ensure transparency and accountability and a good return on taxpayers' money. Thank you for your answer. One thing that struck me as important in contracts awarding are the non-competitive and competitive rules. I get the impression that the contracts that are under $40,000 in June 2019 encourage the decreased transparency. Is that number too low? Are there abuses? Are these non-competitive contracts causing an issue and a lack of accountability? I think there should be a threshold at which saying that there's an exemption for a non-competitive process. That's a good thing. Sometimes contracts of low value are necessary to move things faster. It's not necessary to always have a big market process. So we look at whether there were abuses to determine whether there are departments who divided contracts, for example, or whether the first contract was under the threshold, and then there were other contracts. But we didn't see that with GC Strategies. I mentioned it. I saw this type of issue in the first audit in professional contracts with McKinsey & Company. And so I would expect the department to ensure that there is no division of contracts to avoid competition, because that should be the first recourse for government. Is it relevant to increase the threshold to increase accountability? I think with inflation and the rates for some services, yes, sometimes $40,000 is a low threshold. But my office is not the one that would make that recommendation. It would be up to government, and then I would evaluate whether it was had the desired effect. Quebec is doing an in-depth study of SAAQ Click. Should the federal government conduct that type of investigation of its accounts? Well, that's a decision that the government has to make. I didn't ask for or recommend any type of investigation. I think after the pandemic, if there were to be an investigation, perhaps it would be to assess whether the country would be ready for a future pandemic. But I think it really needs to focus on the basics. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Second round, which will consist of 5 members, 2 from the government, 2 from the official opposition, and 1 from the third party. Deuxième tour, et c'est Monsieur Deltel qui va nous...
The second round, and Mr. Deltel will start us off. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, colleagues. It's great to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the House of Commons. And Mr. Chair, I am very happy and very proud to sit on this committee. It is the reason why I got into politics, to ensure that Canadians' taxpayers' dollars are managed intelligently on behalf of all Canadians, and that we are not spending too much and we're not throwing money out the door. Unfortunately, the testimony that we're hearing today demonstrates the exact opposite. There has been a proof of laxity in the last 10 years, and today Canadians are paying the price. In the example that we're studying exactly, it's GC Strategies, a 2-person company in a basement that wasn't able to and this is why the Auditor General is looking at GC Strategies. 106 contracts awarded through a variety of departments and lax standards and few results. Madam Auditor General, how do you explain this situation? Answer. As you mentioned, this is not the first audit that I have completed on the procurement process where I have observed that the government ignored the rules on procurement. But let's be clear, I am not auditing GC strategies. I am auditing the actions or lack of actions taken by the government. And it is a question that I have asked myself in the 2 audits, and I recommend that the government find the root causes of our findings. And in my opinion, it is because either public servants don't understand the rules, or there are too many rules, or they are sidestepping them. And that is why I recommend the government needs to take a step back and look at the rules on procurement to improve the processes, the entire process. I understand, Ms. Hogan, it's incredible that we're at this state after 10 years. It's just applying the rules, and we're not talking about science here, or rocket science, as we say in English. We're talking about basic, healthy management of public funds. Canadian families know how to manage their budgets, but the government doesn't. So there's no justification, no management, no assessment of the skills, no demonstration of call for tenders, bids that are 80% higher than they should be. These are basic things. How is it that after 10 years of this government, they are still not able to follow the basic rules to ensure that taxpayers' money is properly managed? Answer. Thank you for the summary. I am concerned when 94% of contracts require time sheets that to ensure that the work was properly carried out, where a public servant did not ask for timesheets. We found a contract where there were 25 resources, and the department could only provide us with a timesheet for one of them. And that is why I said that I have difficulty saying that they received value for their money. But when we talk about public servants, they are confident that the services were provided. So it's a return back to basics for the elements needed to demonstrate prudent use of public funds. And these can't be done to junior players. These are high senior ministers, and unfortunately 4 of them did not do their homework, and these are still playing an important role. There is someone who's the chief of staff. We're talking about someone, the minister responsible for international trade between Canada and the United States, the person who is currently the Minister of Foreign Affairs. How is it that 4 ministers who are currently being rewarded by this government, they close their eyes on this laxity about taxpayers' money? Answer. The question of where the ministers were placed, which departments they were in, is not an issue that I would verify. My mandate looks at the decisions of ministers, and not the decisions of ministers, but rather the actions of the public service. And as I mentioned previously, I would not expect a minister to be involved in the daily management of procurement, but I would expect that the department give a briefing on their broad processes within the department tied to procurement, because this is taxpayers' money, and I would expect a better accountability by the public service. Thank you very much.
Next is Ms. Tesser Dirksen.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much. And thanks to all my colleagues around the committee table. As a new member of Parliament, I've found the reports that you submitted very helpful, and I thank you for all the work you do. I certainly don't want you to feel like you're refereeing a political tennis match here, so I'm going to just ask one question on your report about the professional services contract. So I don't think anyone's denying there's serious problems with what happened here, and you have identified that there were certain procurement rules that were not followed. We all know nothing happens in a vacuum. Would you be able to provide comment on contextual factors, either internally or externally, what was going on in the world at the time that may have created a fog within the department that may have contributed to the relegation of rule following?
Well, when I look at the work that I did on professional services contracts, both the previous one and the one that we're talking about today with GC Strategies, it covers a long period of time, 2015 to 2024. So that does include the time of the pandemic. And so I recognize that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty for public servants, not sure where to go, a call for them to really step up and deliver different programs. The Secretary of the Treasury Board at the time issued a letter to all of the public service saying that during a time of crisis, in the time of a health emergency, we need to focus on service, and you can make some of the processes faster, but don't forget to be accountable. But I do believe that a pandemic is not a reason to forget certain basic rules, and what we found is that some of these rules were ignored, not just during that period. So it was before and after. And that is why I do believe the government needs to figure out why this behavior is happening. As I said, why is a staffing company the procurement mechanism? Is that because it's a burdensome procurement process for smaller businesses or an individual who is an IT expert who wants to support the government to get into the government contracts? Is that a reason? Like, I really do think that the government has to look into that more closely. But then we do have to worry about the behaviors that we're seeing in the public service and understand why. And so it goes back to reminders of the rules, some good training, and I do believe that streamlining will help with the complexities that we see in procurements.
Thank you. And I know I said I would only ask one question about this, but I do have just a quick follow-up because you mentioned the timeline. There were problems prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic. Can you give us some idea of kind of the proportional ratio of where more of the problems were happening in that timeline?
I didn't do the triaging, I have to admit, by years. But if I look at the first report that we did, there was 10 departments and 10 Crown corporations on the professional services contracts with McKinsey. And in almost every case, there was an issue. There was a few that were doing a good job, but for the most part, there was issues. In this report, there was 31 federal organizations, and we had a concern with every contract that we looked at. So I don't think you want to link it to time periods. I think you have to link it to it's more pervasive and figuring out why that behavior is happening.
Great, thanks very much. I'm going to move on to Mr. DeMarco for his report, and I want to focus on the Environment and Sustainable Development report. And I did read it through. I take note on your report about the National Adaptation Strategy finding problems with the design of implementation, and you mentioned those in your opening remarks as well. There were 3 components, if I understand correctly. So there's the federal, provincial, and territorial bilateral action plans, and then the Indigenous Climate Leadership Agenda, which were the 2 that were particularly problematic, if I'm remembering correctly. So I'm presuming the 3rd, the Government of Canada Adaptation Action Plan, was satisfactorily established. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. So yes, if you look at Exhibit 1.4, you see that the National Adaptation Strategy was essentially intended to be a 3-legged stool with the 3 components that you just talked about. Only one of those legs is in place, so it's a precarious strategy at the moment with only one of those legs. And that federal action plan, which is the central component of the strategy, is in place, so I can confirm that there's a check mark for that. But we do, later in the report, talk about gaps within that action plan. So I wouldn't say that even that leg is a perfectly sturdy one. There are the problems outlined, including prioritization of risks, economic analysis, and a theme today, value for money analysis. So there are issues associated with that one leg that is in place.
Thank you very much. Suivant encore, c'est M. Lemire pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Once again, Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, for the report on Indigenous services, that's an issue that I think is quite important. In recent years, we've seen a number of people claiming Indigenous ancestry. We call them pretendians. In your report, you indicated that the department was not always able to prove whether the registration decisions were made by duly accredited officers. Who should be making these decisions? Is self-reporting sufficient? Shouldn't this power be delegated to determine who is Indigenous and who is not to the communities themselves, and to give them sufficient resources to do so? Answer. Currently, and in the Act, the registration under the Indian Act, it's the registrar who needs to make decisions on any registration. Yes, Indigenous Services Canada has a responsibility to transfer everything they do to Indigenous communities. And part of what we audited in their relationship with the third-party organizations that support Indigenous communities with registration, but we saw that their budgets were not updated, they were insufficient. And so it's impossible to transfer the responsibilities without ensuring that the communities are sufficiently funded and sufficiently equipped in terms of capabilities. So we issued a number of recommendations to support the department on this file. Are there major consequences? There are delays and projects pushed back, and that means that Indigenous people won't receive medical care, operations, so on and so forth. Do you think it's a two-speed system in that because people are left to their own devices because of this issue? Answer. I'm concerned by the fact that it takes so much time to communicate a decision. 16 months on the average for a decision on a registration request is really too long. And even in priority cases, as identified, as I mentioned, cases where there are medical issues involved, it's 10 months. I think the government needs to ask, why are we able to manage passports, for example, issue a Canadian passport in a much shorter time frame than to make a decision on registration? They should be able to issue important rulings in a shorter timeline.
Have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Appreciate this, and this is exciting for me because at the doors we heard a lot of what was going on with GC Strategy, so I can finally bring the voice of my riding to this Public Accounts Committee is quite exciting. So I want to touch upon, and thank you for touching upon, value for money. And this is very important to me personally, and Canadians and Conservatives, I think. And I want to touch upon that, how we had some success, that we passed the motion to get back the taxpayers $64 million, and I'd like to thank our member from the bloc for supporting that as well. So my line of questioning will be around value for money. So on page 8 of your report, you mentioned that federal organizations hired by GC Strategies for their specialized expertise were hired for their specialized expertise, but on page 9 you noted that 33% of the contracts reviewed, those same organizations couldn't show that the contractors actually had the necessary experience or qualifications. We all know that GC Strategies is a two-person company that simply outsources the work that they've received. Is this standard practice for government departments not to check the skills and qualifications of people hired through their outsourcing contracts?
I would tell you that the rules require the public service to look at that. It is, and that's why I say the rules are clear, right? You have to put in a contract the skills and competencies that you believe are necessary to deliver the work that you need done. GC Strategies does not do any of the IT work. They do subcontract that out. But the expectation is to then receive the resumes or a description of what previous work that resources have done. And as you pointed out, 33% of the contracts we looked at, that documentation had not been maintained. And so it was difficult for us to be able to conclude that the resource that did the work actually had the skills and competencies that were required, and hence being paid the right rate. The work was done, but we can't tell you whether it was good value for money, and neither could the departments because they didn't have the evidence to support that the right skills did the work.
Thank you for clarifying that. Maybe that resorts back to some of the, in my words, you mentioned behavior over the last few years, which I would call maybe bad behavior on this government over the last few years. But another question here. You noted that on page 11 of your report, you highlighted, that the government contractors must prove they did the work before getting paid. Yet your findings show that 40% of the contracts examined, there was little to no proof that that work was actually done. Yet the government department still approve routine payments, or did approve routine payments to GC Strategies. I find that very concerning. I know my constituents found that very concerning during the election, and that was the question. If they're not doing the work, how are they getting paid? Who's looking at this? What's the oversight? Is this normal, and how's this the case?
So I would have told you that it is not normal to sign off and certify that payments should be made when there isn't proof that work was done. And this was one of the concerning behaviors that we saw, because the rules here, again, are very clear that an individual who is going to certify an authorized payment be made, that they have made sure that the work was done, the deliverables were received, or that the rates charged were accurate rates. And not seeing that made us ask a lot of questions. And many of the public servants told us, well, we know it happened, but we just don't have it here to show you and demonstrate. And that's why the procurement rules exist, is to make sure that you leave that trail to show due diligence and to show value for money. So we're not saying the work was not done. We're just saying that public service could not show us that the work was done.
Fair enough. Thank you for your answer. I guess we could chalk that up to bad behavior again. There was another question I had here about, and shortly running out of time. Now, value for money, before signing off on millions of taxpayers' dollars in payments, how is it possible that 31 federal departments got it wrong under the purview of this government?
I believe that points to one of my findings, that I had no reason to believe that this is limited to a specific vendor. I don't have a reason to believe it is because it was contracts with GC Strategies that we're seeing this behavior, because it is across so many organizations, and it echoes the findings I had in my first report, which looked at contracts with McKinsey and Company. So I do believe it's about going back to the basics, honestly, of knowing what the procurement rules are and really appreciating why they're put in place, right? Most contracts, 94% of the contracts required a timesheet. And not to collect them is a bit of a head scratcher when that's the easiest way to show who did what.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Healthfather, nice to have you back at committee as a full-time member, and you have the floor for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to all of you for all the work that you do, and I don't want to put you into a political ping-pong match. I was going to ask you generally about the F-35s, but before that, I think based on the last round of questions, there's just some questions that I have. So my Conservative colleague talked about the House passing a motion to recover $64 million, which, as I understand, is the entire amount paid to GC Strategies. Ms. Hogan, is there any legal basis whatsoever to reclaim the entire amount of money paid to that company, essentially claiming no work was done whatsoever?
I couldn't speak to the specifics in each of those contracts. There's 106 contracts, so from a legal perspective, I would think the departments would have to look at that. But as I said, we saw contracts where the work was done. There's proper support and documentation. So I think an evaluation is needed.
Right. So based on your report, some of the money that was paid and work was actually done, and you have no basis to know that any work wasn't done. All we know is that our standards weren't met in the sense that they couldn't document through timesheets or through other things that were required under the contract that the work was done. I'm not arguing that it wasn't shoddy. I'm not arguing that we should be giving contracts to consultants to do HR hirings that we could do ourselves. But I think that we have to put things in perspective, and that's what I just want to get from you.
Well, I know that Andrew will want to add something here, but every good auditor will tell you that when you don't leave a trail, there is no proof that things have been done. All I can tell you is the attestations I have of public servants, but the lack of evidence to support is always concerning. So, Andrew, did you want to add something?
Yeah, with the proviso that it's not for us to provide a legal opinion, what I would say is that the Financial Administration Act certification, which requires a delegated official to release payment, basically would be seen by our office as that person saying that they got the services and the goods, or the goods in the case of a goods contract, that were supposed to be provided. That's a problem. So when there isn't a paper trail, the government is in a tough spot, going after a person that they've authorized payment and certified that the goods and services were received. So our message to the public service is make sure that you document your files when you sign off on the release of public funds to a contractor.
As somebody who used to be general counsel, I very strongly believe in strong contracts and being able to show that you followed these contracts. What I'm trying to also say, though, is a question of legal liability. I don't know how the government of Canada could purport to recover the full $64 million paid to GC Strategies. I mean, we do understand. One would be led to believe by some of my colleagues' comments that there's $64 million sitting in a bank account at GC Strategies that the government of Canada paid. Now, GC Strategies essentially paid its subcontractors, right? GC Strategy was hired to hire other individuals to do work. We have no evidence that GC Strategies didn't use this money other than its profit margin to pay out the subcontractors, correct?
As I said, I did not look into the actions of GC Strategies, but I would assume that if all of their subcontractors had not been paid, the federal government would be hearing about it.
Right. So essentially, there's no $64 million sitting at GC Strategies for the government of Canada to reclaim, correct? As
Again,
far as you know,
I can't
as far
comment
based on a reasonable person's assumption.
I can't comment what's on the books of GC Strategies. I did not audit that company.
No, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm saying based on a reasonable person, as you just said, they likely paid all their subcontractors the monies that they were supposed to be paid. They didn't earn $64 million in profits from the federal government. They were paid a total amount of $64 million, through which we know they hired subcontractors, and in some of the different contracts, the contracts were fulfilled. And we have no proof in the others they weren't fulfilled. We just know they didn't meet the written requirements or the requirements of the contract for you to know in an auditor's basis that they were fulfilled, correct?
So what I would say about this is, first, on our mandate, we don't have the ability to follow through with the contracting arm's length. Like we can't go and look at how GC Strategies engages with the subcontractors. It's fair to assume that if the subcontractors weren't being paid, they would pursue both GC Strategies and probably the government as a defendant in seeking their compensation.
Any actions where that was taken?
We did not do a litigation search or a court search, but again, what our point is in this, we can't say exactly what has been provided to the government in terms of services and deliverables when there isn't evidence in the file.
Again, nobody arguing that that was good.
Is
just
the
making
time,
the point.
Mr. Housefather. So, thank you very much. I appreciate that exchange. Beginning our third round now. Again, will consist of 5 members, which will probably take us to the top of the hour. Ms. Kuzi, you have the floor again for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to go back to the 54% could not prove deliverables were received. You and I had a brief conversation about this previously. As a former public servant, this was absurd to me, considering that the process of signing 32, 33, 34 requires that you must receive the deliverables before payment is released. You must sign the Section 33 before the payment is released in the Section 34. Similarly, my colleague had mentioned that we had put forward a motion back to try and get back the money, since it's pretty evident here that in 54% of cases, they could not prove deliverables were received. I think it is a reasonable assumption that all of the work was not completed, all of the deliverables were not received, and therefore it would be reasonable to ask for the money back for many other reasons, but I think the greatest piece of evidence to ask for the money back lies within that. In addition, in the last Parliament, I asked the previous Treasury Board president if she would make the obligation to get the money back. She said that she would. We have yet to see a single cent. In the Committee of the Whole last week, I asked the president of the Treasury Board, the new president of the Treasury Board, actually the fourth during my time in this shadow role, if he would make the commitment to the Canadian people to get the money back. So I guess given all of these lapses, the motion passed, the inability to get the money back by the previous president of the Treasury Board, the weak commitment of the current president of the Treasury Board to get the money back. But going back to your reference of the nuts and bolts, the paperwork of the public servants themselves, it's astounding, as I said, that a 33 would have been signed for a financial release in Section 34 when 54% could not prove that deliverables will receive. So this is all leading to my question of which, in your opinion, at what point are ministers accountable for the funds going out? Because we have seen in testimony again and again with GC Strategies and procurement that the rules are not being enforced and followed, as you indicated yourself, yet there seems to be no one who is ultimately accountable for this. And it seems to me that the ministers, which my colleague has pointed out, have been retained in this government, have been promoted in this government, are not even being held responsible for these funds. So at what point do you believe ministers are accountable for these funds that are paid out that we can't even prove for which we received a deliverable? Thank you.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, just to clarify one of the percentages, it is in 46% of the cases that we found little to no evidence that supported deliverables. I do believe the honourable member gave a different number. I think it's ultimately up to this committee and other parliamentarians to hold ministers to account. It is my responsibility to ensure that deputy ministers, who are the accounting officers of departments, are ultimately accountable for all the decisions and actions that happen in their organization. And the member is absolutely correct that there's a delegation made to an individual in the organization to authorize funds be dispersed, and that comes with responsibility. And we would expect that when that certification is done, that they leave a paper trail to ensure that they can demonstrate that they acted with the best interest of government and spent funds wisely. So ultimately, that's why I think deputy ministers should be coming here to speak to why their procurement processes and their procurement officers were not following procurement rules.
Thank you. In addition, 82% of federal organizations could not prove that fees did not exceed market rates. Again, in my time as in the public service, 3 quotes were required. You had to take the lowest. Were any policies violated in not obtaining these? And are there best practices in other jurisdictions that exist to assure this does not happen again?
So the finding about not being able to demonstrate that the fees paid were market rates is a unique one here, as many of these contracts were low dollar value contracts, as I mentioned previously, or they were contracts where only one valid bid had been received. And so while that exemption exists that you don't need to do a competitive process, there is still a requirement to make sure that the price paid is a market value price and not inflated. And this is one of the areas, and I think this is why the finding was so high, that so many times we didn't see this done, that many public servants didn't know that this requirement existed. But it is one to just double check that even though you don't go through the competitive process, that you do something to make sure that the price you're paying is a market rate.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Ms.
Thank
Guzzi.
you.
Up next, Mr. Osborne, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Not to continue to toss the football that seems to have become a political football, but you've indicated that government ignored the rules. When you say government, sometimes the general public look at the legislature as the government. Do you mean when government ignored the rules, either chose to ignore the rules or did not understand the rules? Do you mean parliamentarians or do you mean individuals within organizations?
So my apologies. I at times probably do use those interchangeably, but in this case, we audit the actions of the public service. Now, it's ultimately the policies put in place by the public service that do that get approved, that should be followed. But the government, being the elected officials, has to make sure that the public service is putting these rules in place and following those rules. So my apologies if I provided some confusion, but here we were looking at the actions of the public service, and they did not follow the rules that they themselves have in place.
Thank you. You'd also indicated that ministers should not be involved in the day-to-day part of the tendering process. So while sometimes either rules were not followed or not clearly understood, there are individuals that are trying to make this look like a minister did not do their job. The real issue here, as I'm understanding it, is there are perhaps too many rules, and over the course of a number of years or decades, rules keep getting put in place. There perhaps needs to be a streamlining of rules, maybe a better understanding and education of public servants of what the rules are. Can you clarify?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy that your question sort of kept building on that. It allows me to expand on my response that I gave earlier. The Financial Administrations Act, which a previous member was referring to when she was mentioning Section 32, 33, 34, is a law. And that is something that the ministers, that government put into place. And then the rules that the public service puts into place are how to operationalize that. So the requirement that when you certify that you have evidence is part of a law. It is part of the Financial Administrations Act. How that's done is what's in the rules and regulations. And that's where I think there's confusion. There are so many rules added on to how to operationalize that I think is why we're seeing the behavior now where they're not followed because they might not be known, or they slow down the process and people might try to work around them to expedite a procurement process. So I hope that helps the member, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So just building on that further, I mean, ministers over the course of years or decades, regardless of the administration, would have put rules in place. Under the Financial Administration Act, those rules need to be followed. We need to ensure that timesheets are signed off on and so on. Is it, what would your recommendations be in this regard? Because I know in the last round there were no recommendations. There are already enough rules in place. But the timesheets that were not signed off on, for example, the verification that money was being spent as it should be, or there was value for money, where does that responsibility rest, knowing that the rules have been put in place?
It is if I walk down the web of rules, right? Ministers are accountable and answer to Parliament, and then in turn, ministers hold deputy ministers accountable for delivering on all the programs and services and following all the rules and acts that exist. Deputy ministers then delegate that somewhere into their organization. And so the responsibility then rests with a responsible person overseeing procurement in each and every department, agency, and Crown Corporation. So the requirement of getting a timesheet comes from two places, that sort of delegation, but then also if the contract calls for it. So it's enforcing the terms and conditions of the contract that the departments would have put into place. So ultimately, that it flows its way back up through the organization, but it starts with the individual managing the contract and the procurement process.
You've got just a few seconds. Why don't we hold it off for next time, and I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. I appreciate it. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes 30.
Next, Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, I think it's important to benefit from your presence today. So I will represent my colleague from Repentigny, who is asked in your fourth report. He said that you say that Canada is barely implementing sustainable development in Canada. So therefore, we have the worst performance on sustainable development indicators. How do you explain that Canada has improved the least? It's among the worst countries when it comes to reaching sustainable development goals, as bad as the U.S. How do we correct this issue? Thank you. Yes, in report number 4, we say that Canada is improving somewhat. That's the good news. We're not going in the wrong direction, but the level of improvement is the worst of the G7. Why? We see that there are 17 sustainable development objectives. Four are most difficult for Canada and have been since 2000 for the level of improvement, and that's net zero, climate change measures, responsible consumption, we mentioned that in committee, and biodiversity. Those 4 issues in particular are a problem for Canada. We're not improving we're not accelerating our improvement compared to the other 6 nations of the G7, and that was one reason. Is my time? Oh, my time is limited. I have a complementary question. We are currently being muzzled on C5, which limits the powers on environmental protections and legislation on biodiversity. Are you concerned about the impact that C5 may have on these 2 issues? As I said last week, I've not analyzed the bill. I will analyze it if it becomes law. But in my report, there are relevant excerpts. If you look at report number 3 on oceans, we see that not much progress has been made in determining where we can locate new projects in the oceans. And in 3.4, there's an example of if we haven't completed studies on areas where energy projects are permitted or not, where are habitats or sites that are important to protect, it's more difficult to make a well-founded decision. And so I'm concerned by these 2 reports and our report last year that stated that we don't have enough data to make enlightened decisions. We can accelerate the implementation of our recommendations to maximize the possibilities of making good decisions, database decisions. Thank you. Then followed by Mr. Deltel. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, when you tabled your report last week, you made a comment that struck me, and people in my riding Two, you said we found problems in almost all of the contracts that we looked at, which indicates to me that there's no reason to believe that it's limited to GC Strategies. Can you tell us what that means? That there may be hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money being spent. As I mentioned, I completed 2 audits on professional contracts. The ones that I made public last week were on GC Strategies, but I had done another previously on McKinsey and Company. If we look at the number of departments and Crown corporations in those reports, there's roughly 50. I have no reason to believe that it's limited to 2 contractors. I think the public service is the issue. It has forgotten or is not applying the procurement rules that, in my opinion, are very clear. So we need to get back to the basics to ensure that this is done. But that doesn't mean that no service was received. It's a lack of accountability that currently exists. And now this falls under the ministerial department. This is a fundamental principle in Canadian democracy, and we must protect it. Ministers are the one who are responsible for the money that is taken from taxpayers' pockets. And I understand that there are public servants who are doing their jobs or not doing their jobs. I understand that there are directors who are not looking at the problems head on. But at the end of the day, elected officials are responsible for this because they are the ones who seek out the taxes from Canadians. We call that ministerial responsibility. And when I see that 4 successive ministers have directed this very important department and that today still play a very important role in the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, the person responsible for international trade with the United States. We can't close our eyes and say, well, the public servants did this or didn't this. Shouldn't a minister lose their job over this? We lost a minister for a $16 orange juice, but now you're telling that you're not troubled by this, that it's just public servants? At some point, don't you think that the ministers have a responsibility on this issue? Answer. Our audits covered about 10 years from 2015 to 2025. That's a long period of time. And yes, public servants are accountable to their deputy ministers, and the deputy ministers are responsible to the minister, who are accountable to Parliament and Canadians. So yes, there is a common thread that starts with a public servant and that ends with a minister. And we've seen this for 10 years now, over a 10-year period, where there was this laxity. And the people responsible are still occupying very important roles in government. People, taxpayers at home who are listening to us, are they getting value for their money? No, and that's the problem that we're seeing. You spoke about the F-37 program. There have been cost overruns and things have been unwinding. But, Madam Auditor General, what signal are we sending to Canadians when every time that we touch everything, there are cost overruns and there's no accountability from elected officials who are the ones who are seeking out money from the pockets of taxpayers? Answer. A point of clarification. We just mentioned about professional contracts went back to 2011, so it's over a decade. I would just like to be exact in my answers. I think it demonstrates that over the years, the rules that have been added have probably complicated the process, the procurement process. But each public servant and each deputy minister and minister are accountable, and there needs to be accountability to Canadian citizens, I agree. And here we need to look at the fact that these services were received. It's that the public service is not able to demonstrate in all cases that these services were indeed received. There you have it. A quick question, or are you okay? I'll stop at 5 minutes and 6 seconds out of respect for the chair.
Or for, we're running out. J'ai laissé M. Lemire un peu de temps.
I let Mr. Lemire have a bit of extra time.
Thank you. In your report, Ms. Hogan, there's been a series of amendments to the Indian Act aimed at rectifying inequities. What are the amendments and how have they increased the number of registration applications?
So I think it was back in 2017 and 2019, there were amendments made to the Indian Act to remove historical systemic discrimination that existed. In particular, if women married outside of their community, they would lose their Indian status, and then also their children would. And so there were legislative changes made that was rectifying that, and individuals then had to apply. So what that caused was an increase in applications. The period that we looked at was between 2019 and 2024, and in that time frame, there was 140,000 requests for registration that were looked at, which was an increase over previous years for sure. Those priority cases, if that's what you want to call them, because we were sort of righting past wrongs, were not treated any differently than all the other requests for registration. So some of them are sitting in the backlog. Many of them waited 16 months on average to receive a decision, and really, regardless of what your situation is, that is too long a period of time to be waiting to hear about your status.
Why could these registrations not be processed faster?
I think the few reasons that we found, one was the increase in registrations because of the changes to the Act, so obviously a resourcing issue. But there is an opportunity here for Indigenous Services Canada to find some efficiencies in their processes, which is why we issued several recommendations. We saw that non-complex applications at times could be a decision could be rendered in one day. And so there is the ability to make this more efficient, and that's why they need to look at it. I think you also have to factor in that the time we're talking about doesn't include the time that the department might be waiting for a province or territory to provide documentation. And so an individual is actually waiting longer than 16 months because at times there is a pause to make sure that official documents are received. So that's really too long, and that's why I encourage them to compare and look at how quickly passports can be processed and what efficiencies can they find in that process to bring to this process.
That there were resource issues? What?
So we didn't look at their resourcing challenges, but that is what Indigenous Services Canada highlighted because of the increase. And so they triage the applications. Non-complex are given to regional offices, and then the more complex ones are kept sort of in the head office to deal with. And we saw a difference in that when they were not complex, they were processed in average 44 days, but that about 20% or so were done in one day. And then it is the more complex ones that involve either adoption or lengthy periods of time, ancestry, where it's taking about 16 months.
Do you feel that they had the technological infrastructure to support these registrations, or were they still bound by a more traditional system of paper filing and whatnot?
Most of the process was paper-based, and I do know that the department is looking to automate, which I think would help with efficiency, and that's why our recommendations around really dissecting what's slowing down, where they have bottlenecks, will help them identify ways to fix things. But an IT system is just a tool to help you be more efficient. You still need to have trained individuals, and you have to show that they've done the proper training and that they've made decisions that have been reviewed before they can make decisions on their own. So there's a lot of elements in our recommendations that will help them improve their process.
The priority applications, did that include seniors?
So we did look at what
health problems?
Yeah, we did look at what the department triaged as priority cases. It included older individuals, elders in communities, but also individuals who had health concerns. And we found that still they were exceeding their service standard of 6 months because on average those priority files were taking about 10 months, which is a really long time if you're waiting for funding to be able to be transported out of community for a health procedure. I would hope that they would speed up the process on priority cases because of the nature of some of the priority cases.
So what improvements can be targeted for those priority cases? Because that's a long time if you need a medical procedure. It could just, get worse.
It is a very long time, and I think part of it was because every file goes through the same process. Even though it was identified as priority, it still follows the exact same steps, and that's why they need to figure out a way to streamline what they do and make it more efficient.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you have a last one, you're welcome to.
Sure. This is for the Sustainable Development Report. So, Mr. DeMarco, it was good to see that Parks Canada monitored 100% of planned actions. How can the other organizations improve the monitoring of their planned actions?
Yes, thank you for the question. The Critical Habitat Report has an exhibit that shows, Exhibit 2.4, that shows that only 57% of the actions, the conservation actions on federal land were clearly monitored. But as you pointed out, the average isn't a very good measure because Parks Canada is batting 100%, and fisheries and oceans and environment and climate change are only in the teens. So a simple answer would be for DFO and Environment and Climate Change Canada to copy a little bit of the success story from Parks Canada because they have an actual database that tracks all of their actions on federal land and consolidates that information, which is why they got the check mark from us. So the simple answer would be for Fisheries and Oceans and Environment and Climate Change Canada to take it as seriously as Parks Canada does and consider employing the same sort of tracking and database system that Parks Canada. It's not the only solution, but it would be the simplest solution.
And thank you, Ms. Yip. I think we're spot on time, but maybe a minute over. But Ms. Hogan, I want to thank you and your team for coming in today on relatively quick notice and for tabling your report so promptly when Parliament got back to work last week. So so thank you, and we will see you again soon. And have a nice rest of the day and good weekend as you head into the weekend. You are excused. Members, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to suspend for 5 minutes so we can just let everyone kind of clear the room who are leaving. The next meeting is, though, in public, and I'll bring us back in 5 minutes. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. This meeting is suspended. First, I just want to say gold star. Everyone, I think, demonstrated how a committee should operate when there was some to and fro with the witnesses on both sides. There were no volleys coming in from the opposite side of the committee. The time, obviously, that members has is their time, and they're allowed to listen to the witnesses or challenge them, stop them. So that was well done. But importantly, it's the members' time for their own, not to be interrupted by another member. So I know it happens. I don't like it when it happens, and I will scold those that do it. Not only repeatedly when they do it, but today it was a model committee for those that are watching. So thank you, and I hope that continues. A couple of items that, if I could just run through, what I really consider routine business, but of course, if there's any discussion, we'll have it. First up is a budget item that was sent to you for today's meeting, and just a point of clarification that I learned as chair, but not right away. We have a requested amount here for $500, which includes some of the coffee and some of the items that we need to run the meetings. But whatever we don't spend comes back to us. So even though it's an allocation for $500, we will not spend anywhere near that today. Do I just ask for? Do I have to have someone move it, clerk, or do I just look for? Yeah. Could I have agreement that we will approve this budget? I'm seeing hands up. Yes. Any dissent? I'm seeing none. This is passed. Next up, there were 3 proposed routine motions. I understand I caused a bit of a flurry with some of the whips when I proposed one last week that was not previously indicated. I want to assure members here that that was a routine motion from a previous pack. It was not my intention to kind of move ahead without consulting members, but I think we handled it well. Today there were 3 more that were sent to you that I had tabled last time. They needed a little investigation. I want to stress these are motions that are coming from the clerk and the analyst. So if you have questions about them, I'm going to defer to them. These are motions that were adopted at the start of the 44th Parliament and probably the Parliament before that. So I will open things up to Mr. Housefather. You will address through me, but I'll probably have the analyst answer why they're structured this way if you have those kind of questions.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, my only question is related to the first motion. I've been in a lot of committees, and I've never seen this adopted as a routine motion. I've seen us, with respect to specific witnesses, give a shorter time period or a longer time period, but I don't really understand why we would have an equal time period for every single issue and every single witness. I don't think that's reasonable. I'd rather do it case by case. I just want to understand, do you know of any other committees and many other committees that have this? Because I have not seen it on any committee I've ever sat on as a routine motion.
Could I just interject, Mr. Housefather, and say, why don't we ask them, we'll get an answer why it's here, and then in the meantime we can find out what other committees do, because we're not bound by what other committees do, obviously, and this is a unique committee, and that it's an oversight committee that looks at public accounts. So would you like to hear the answer why, and then we can examine what other committees do? So yes, please.
Thank you, sir. Here at Public Accounts, we have a very specific process for the study of the reports. The answer that are received are needed in order to write the report and to follow up on specific recommendations. This is why we gave this timeline of 3 weeks, I believe, a couple of parliaments ago, and we just keep the same structure so that departments are aware of this 3 week and can follow up on this regularly. Whatever the reports, whatever the issue, they have the exact same framework in order to avoid confusion, mistakes, miscommunication, that kind of sort of thing.
Mr. Housefather, you were. I'm going to see if I don't know if that question was anticipated about what other committees do. I will see if the clerk can provide some direction or an answer on that. Yes, apparently she can. So I'll turn the things over to the clerk.
So I did a quick search while the analyst was speaking, and it looks like the Government Operations Committee adopted a similar motion in 44-1. So there was PAC and also OGO that had this motion in 44-1 as a routine motion. no other committee that I could find in my quick search, but yeah.
I think it's probably obvious, Mr. Housefather. So 44-1 was when your members were in the driver's seat of this committee. So that's a motion that would have been brought up in the 41st Parliament, which is when the Conservative governments were in office, and this routine motion has obviously existed since then. Yeah.
I thought, Mr. Chair, that the clerk had mentioned it was 44-1.
Did you say 44-1 or? Oh, pardon me. I heard 41. Pardon me. Excuse me, Mr. Housefather. Sorry about that. I will have my hearing checked. Excuse me. Well, I undercut my argument, so there you are. Again, hoping it is always my intent to try to bridge the divide whenever I can to make these motions as palatable as possible, because I know sometimes motions come along that are more difficult. So, pardon, Monsieur le Ministre, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Concerning the motion received this morning from Internal Economy, Motion 1, for the reasons also mentioned by my colleague Anthony, the Bloc Québécois will vote against the motion because this should be a case-by-case deadline. And what I experienced with Soccer Canada and others sometimes required a much shorter deadline to turn around the committee's proper functioning. And so if we are trapped into a motion that sets a date, perhaps it will harm more than it will help the committee's experience. So we will oppose the motion. Very well.
Called the commentaire.
Any other comments?
So let me just give some background. I actually, when I took over in the last Parliament, was not aware there was kind of explicit motion like this, and the practice was witnesses are given 3 weeks. And generally, in the vast majority of times, they comply with it. And one thing I never did was, if they didn't, just call them up on my own. Never. We always actually, as a committee, returned to it, discussed it, and sometimes the witnesses would just get a nudge from this side of the table. If that was not deemed sufficient, a more formal letter might come from me, and ultimately a motion would be proposed from members. I wouldn't deviate from that, whether this motion passes or not. I would still continue to use my discretion. I don't think we go from DEFCON 5 to 1 in a single blow, particularly when witnesses do come before this committee, and we try to work with them to get answers. So, however you decide to vote on this, I just wanted to put that out there, that cette motion va pas changer notre.
This motion will not change the way in which we have proceeded to date. It is a discussion. If the answers don't come,
the 3-week mark, and call a witness in on my own. I don't think that would be appropriate because sometimes things happen. Stephanie, do you want to make a comment? Ms. Kuzi, pardon me, do you want to make a comment?
That's fine. Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's the spirit of this is fine. I think it's to show a form of accountability for those who indicate they will provide further information or a written response, and then a mechanism to follow up if this is not the case. I am fine with this as a standard practice, but more importantly, I do not think that eliminating it as a routine motion stops the committee or prohibits the committee or does not allow the committee to provide for shorter time frames for documents to be provided, as well as the process and severity of the process to demand a follow-up for these. So certainly, while I am fine with disposing of routine motion 1, I do not think it does dispose of our ability to demand documents in a series of different timeframes and to be able to escalate the demand for these documents in a manner of different formats.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Tesser-Durskin, you have the floor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And if you'll indulge me, if the committee will indulge me, being a new member, you mentioned that there had been some rare instances in the past where there was some follow-up required, but generally, do we see a problem with witnesses providing their undertakings in a reasonable time? I mean, is there a pattern of problematic behavior among witnesses that would require this?
Well, pardon me if you're done. Yes. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's a pattern, but it has happened, and it of course there was the explosive testimony of one witness who had to appear before the House of Commons for failure to provide information. So it does happen, but it's usually one that is resolved with some push and pull, and ultimately, if a motion is passed, the information comes quickly. I don't think we've had to call witnesses in to explain why they haven't, with the exception of that one. But I don't even think that was that committee. This committee, it's more of something. Just this motion, I think, is here as a fail-safe, if you like. I think it signals to everyone who has agreed to provide information to this committee that they will do so, and they'll be bound to do so, which is generally understood, which is why I'm not too fussed by this motion one way or the other, because ultimately, if we feel the information provided is not sufficient, even if they give us information, we don't think it's correct, we can still call them in. We can still request more information. I think this is just a signal to everyone at the outset what our powers are. But whether this motion passes or not, we still retain them. Yes, Mr. Osborne.
Can I make a motion that we vote against and dispense?
Why don't I just call the vote? All right, so very good. I think I'll do a roll call vote since I'm hearing kind of yeas and nays, so the clerk will proceed with a roll call, please.
Mr. Housefather?
Nay.
Mr. Osborne?
Nay.
Ms. Tesser-Dirksen?
Nay.
Ms. Yep?
Nay.
Monsieur Dantin?
Oui.
Mr. Kirk? Ms. Kuzi?
In favor.
Monsieur Lemire?
Contre.
3 yeas, 5 nays.
Motion 1 is defeated, and Mr. Housefather, you have my word. In the next Parliament, when you're in opposition, if I'm on this committee, I will vote to bring this motion back with you. Let's go to the second routine motion, which you have before you. I'll see if there's any questions or comments. I'll give it a couple seconds here, and if I see none, I'll move to a vote. Monsieur Lemire, as-tu des commentaires? Just
on est en faveur des deux autres.
Mr. Lemire, do you have a comment? We're in favor of the two other motions.
I'll just call a vote. I don't think we need a roll call for this. Any opposition to this? I'm hearing none. Could I hear some yeas then? Yay. Perfect. Thank you. That is number 2 is passed. Thank you. I'll turn now to number 3. Give it a few seconds for people to catch my eye if they wish to speak to it. Is there any opposition to the proposed motion number 3 on your sheet? I'm seeing none. Could I have a yay vote? Just a yay oral vote? Yes.
Yay.
Yes. Okay. That is passed as well. Thank you very much. Okay. If I could, I'm going to be brief as I can with this, and we can talk about it offline. You're welcome to ask the clerk as well. This is, pardon me, this is the upcoming, the acronym is long, the Canadian Council of Public Accounts Committees, which twins with a meeting of Auditor Generals from across the country, is meeting in September. Now, I'm happy to talk about this trip in public because my voters will look at me and say, so you're planning to go to Saskatchewan in September to meet with other Public Account Committee members and 11 Auditors General of Canada, across Canada. They'll take a breath and say, that's fine. This is a working meeting of Auditor Generals and other committee chairs. It is about as vanilla as it gets. I'm bringing this up because I don't want to be the obstacle for members attending. This is actually an interesting conference, particularly for new members, because you do have the Auditor General, her team there, as well as provincial auditors as well. As I said, committee members at the provincial level as well. There are some hurdles we have to go to. Again, I'm in the hands of the committee. A budget was sent to you at the start of the meeting. It is for 5 members to attend, 1 analyst, and the clerk. The other reason I'm bringing this up is because we are the national, the federal Public Accounts Committee. We are seen as the first among equals of committees. We do set the tone in a way at these meetings. Our input is soft, and the work, is sought, and the work that we do is of both national relevance and at times newsworthy. So the process that this has to go through is a bit murky because the liaison hasn't met yet. The subcommittee liaison hasn't met. But the third option is to go to the Board of Internal Economy. So the budget for this meeting is just over $30,000. We can discuss it. We can vote to approve it. That will just be the first step. It then has to go to the other parties for review and approval, and then it goes to Parliament. Now, how that's going to work, because the meeting is before Parliament comes back, I'm not sure, but sometimes they can have retroactive votes. Again, I don't want to be the person to hold up this opportunity for members to both learn and as well to play leadership role that we do. So if there's any debate, I'll hear it, and if there's none, I will turn to a vote to approve what I think is a routine expenditure amount. Oui, Monsieur Lemire.
D'un point de vue
Yes,
personnel,
Mr. Lemire, personally, I think it is relevant to be in attendance. However, we will likely be in our pre-sessional caucus, so I would perhaps be able to attend for the first day, but I would miss the others. That's just my personal point, and that's about the limits of what I could do, but would the committee still want to pay their registration fees if I could only attend for one day? Yes, I believe so.
Une précision, Monsieur le Président, c'est combien de personnes en tout? Vous avez dit 5?
I'm sorry, how many people total? Analysts? Oh, I'm sorry, it's 4 MPs. 5 MPs, rather. Well, it's not a trip to Jamaica. It's Canadians, and it's five people. And that's why we have normally trips of this type, or for how many MPs? 5. Okay, then. Any other comments?
Again, is there anyone that dissents on this budget item going to either the liaison committee or the Board of Internal Economy for review? No. Could I then have a yay vote, a yay oral vote that it has been approved?
Yay.
A little louder.
Yay.
Thank you very much. Very good. All right. Over the next couple weeks, the analysts will email you. There was a draft copy that went out. You might have seen on outstanding reports. I've just made some tweaks to it, cleaned up the language a little bit because it indicated that decisions have been made from the last Parliament. You'll have that again to review. Now, going forward, I'll trying to get a little feedback. So, this obviously is an oversight committee. Our practice has been to meet generally when the House is sitting, but it is not uncommon for this meeting for this committee to meet outside of that as well. I'm going to speak with the vice chairs and consult with them over the next couple weeks about priorities, what we want to look at. We have got a number of reports that were just tabled. The committee's always put the emphasis on the Auditor General reports. The environment reports can be studied, but the Environment Committee will also pick those reports up, where we are the only committee that will look at the Auditor General's report. So they're not out of bounds, but our priority is generally on the auditor reports. So we have the 4 that she just tabled, but there's also a number that were tabled at the end of last year that we did not get a chance to review over the winter because Parliament was dissolved. So I'll have discussions with Ms. Yip, Monsieur Lemire, puis aussi Madame Cusi pour
and also Ms. Cusi to see how we will move forward
from the parties on study priorities, and then come out with a work plan that encompasses that. So everyone has a bit of skin in the game and some interest about which reports they would like to study. Yes, Ms. Yim.
I think we should have a subcommittee meeting in the fall to decide what reports to review. And just a point, the Environment Committee rarely looks at the commissioners' reports, and we have studied those reports in the past.
Very, as I said, we certainly can pick them up. I'm not aware of the rarity. I've been informed Environment does look at them, but if that's not true, I will perhaps speak with the chair of the Environment Committee to pick them up, since he has numerous reports, and there's no way we can get to them all. So I'll review that. So yes, so we will have a subcommittee meeting then to begin to tackle that. Any other comments?
Juste par indication, à quel moment vous...
At which point do you see that occurring? Would it be midsummer, at the end of summer, at the first meeting? You're talking about the subcommittee? Probably at the beginning of the summer, just to, well, if not tomorrow, perhaps tomorrow, because now we have a request for a subcommittee meeting, so perhaps tomorrow. Otherwise, I think it would be at the beginning of the summer. But I know that you have a very important Saint Jean-Baptiste to celebrate. Yes, National Aboriginal Day and also Saint Jean-Baptiste. I just want to ensure that we're not missing any regular committee sittings in September. Yes.
Then I will. Oh yes, yes.
Could you just clarify when the subcommittee meeting is? Is it in the fall?
Oh no, I will have it well before the fall. Mr. Lemire's point was to have the meeting, so we don't. There are things we have to plan for, Ms. Yip, and I can't be calling witnesses if the subcommittee has not met. So I might even try to have it tomorrow, but if not, it'll be the start of the summer, and the 3 of us, the 4 of us, will join probably by Zoom. Okay. All right. Encore une question, Monsieur Lemire?
Oui, ben, si vous me permettez, je déposerai...
Once again, Mr. Lemire, yes, if you would allow me, I will table a notice of motion. If you're ready to adopt it, all the better, but I'd like to table them formally as sent on June 16th, that pursuant to Standing Order 1083G of the House of Commons, the committee undertake a study of... The committee recommends that the Auditor General of Canada conduct a performance audit of the federal additions to reserve process as administered by Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, CERNAC, in order to assess, A, the effectiveness and efficiency of the ATR application processing, as well as cause of persistent delays, the transparency, predictability, and clarity of the assessment criteria applicable to First Nations. D, the coordination among CERNAC, Indigenous Services Canada, provinces, municipalities, and affected First Nations. E, compliance with the commitments outlined in the policy on additions to reserve and designated lands. And F, the outcome achieved in terms of self-determination, community development, and equitable access to public services following the addition of land to a reserve. and that this audit contribute to the responsible, transparent, and effective management of public funds consistent with the Government of Canada's commitments to First Nations and support to the reconciliation process. What is the motion? What is the objective of the motion? I see in my writing and elsewhere that there are Indigenous communities that have a reserve territories that bring resources for children, health, justice, and others. And in a number of communities, they don't have this additions to reserve status, and there is unfairness. I would like to understand these mechanisms and take corrective measures if necessary. Thank you. So your motion was already formally submitted to the committee when you sent it to our clerk a few days ago. To move forward, we can debate your motion now. Perhaps things will go quickly, I don't know. My opinion is that we should wait to another meeting, but it is your motion, and you are entitled to debate it now if you wish. Just give me 30 seconds, please.
Wait, alors, est-ce que c'est quelque...
Is this something that you would like us to debate now? Well, I would like it to be voted on so that it will allow us perhaps to allow the analysts to get started and do some upstream work, but we could also discuss it at subcommittee. But I think that your motion is for a study, is it not? So it's not our clerk to decide. It's not for our clerk to decide, and I can't call a vote before we have a debate here at committee to find out whether our committee supports this motion.
For new members, if I may, so the Auditor General receives many requests from Canadians at large, organizations, parliamentarians to pick up audits. This committee has also recommended or passed motions asking the auditor to look at subject matters, and as Parliament, the auditor does prioritize obviously the request from Parliament itself, and takes motions from this committee under advisement and very seriously. And we've had examples where she has accepted the motions from this committee, and we've had examples where she has declined for whatever reasons. There's correspondence on that if you would like to read it. So we are in a privileged position as public accounts to send motions to the auditor. I don't think they should be done quickly or lightly. I do think they should be discussed. I think je pense, Monsieur Lemire.
I think, Mr. Lemire, there are a lot of requests. Members will have questions about why it should be studied by our committee, because you as an MP, you are free to send your request to the Auditor General, but you are also a member of this committee, so you can ask us to join you. But I don't think it's something that will be decided upon quickly. I could be wrong. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I'm not the one who needs to decide. If you'll allow me, if there is consensus, let's move forward. And if we require discussion, then we can come back to it this fall or at subcommittee.
Yeah, just get your mic. Yes.
Yeah, we need to
a little time. Yeah.
Yeah, time to
Oui.
to ask questions and so forth.
Oui. Et voilà. Alors moi je pense.
Yes, I think that we should take a bit of time, if you agree, because I think that our members need to do a bit of research and also to speak directly with you as well. I agree. I'm glad it was done publicly. I think it sends a good message to the people concerned that the work has kicked off.
1 second. It is my intention to adjourn this meeting. This meeting is adjourned. We'll see you all soon. See you later in Parliament, and have a nice summer.
Merci, merci.